Hello ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to discuss Ashes of Creation, specifically tanking. Now I enjoy tanking, not only because it usually means instant queues for the instance content, but because I like the feeling of being the wall between my teammates who are made of wet tissue paper and death, which can be quite the power trip. Ask the healers. Now I want to discuss all things tank in Ashes of Creation, but today specifically I want to focus on the classes and theorycraft what they might look like. So let's do it. Now if you aren't aware, Ashes of Creation divides their classes into 8 archetypes, from which you pick a primary, which defines what role you play, and a secondary that augments your abilities. If you want to know more, I explained it in my 2022 Ashes of Creations update, which you should definitely go check out. Self-plug out of the way, this means that in order to properly tank high-end content, you must choose the archetype tank as your primary. Now I know what you're thinking. If every tank has to be primary, then will we all just be copies of each other running around using the same abilities? Maybe. We know that your secondary archetype augments your abilities, but it's to varying degrees. Now these are the available archetype combinations, so that'll change things. Plus your race can augment your abilities. Plus, tanks will have different build options. You can play a dodge tank, a control tank, or a shield tank. So fret not, there will be some customization. For instance, I, who has the most correct opinion on the internet, will be getting a bit creative with my character. I am going to be a male human paladin that wields a shield. And that means that my tanking style, my weapons and augments are going to be completely different than, say, a warden or a keeper. And that is what I really want to talk about in today's video, the possibilities of each tank. Now the abilities of the basic tank, the primary archetype as we know them, are on screen. Feel free to pause, read them over, or head over to the wiki and read them for yourself. These abilities will be available to all tanks just by picking your primary archetype. Where it gets funky is when you start introducing the secondary archetypes, such as... Now I'm not only starting with the Paladin because it's the de facto best class in the game, but because it's also one of the classes that we have the most information on. The Cleric class is described as having power over life and death, not just in the if you irritate them they might let you die sense, but in they literally have necromancer ability sense. Their skills are described as restoration, enhancement, and debilitation, and that is what they offer anyone who chooses them as a secondary archetype. Players will be able to choose if they go down a life route or a death route for their augments. Life, we can assume, means self-healing, maybe even group healing abilities, maybe a resurrection spell, and hopefully some super awesome Holy Smite action. The death route will likely give you debuffs to use on your enemies, to drain their life or lower their stats. Either of those gives you different options on how you want to tank. You can either slap a band-aid on anyone who gets a boo-boo, or shout mean things at the enemy until they get depressed and don't want to fight anymore. Now we don't have details such as these on all of the classes, so for the rest of these we're going to have to do some inferring and critical thinking. So grab some coffee or a Red Bull if you don't already have some, because you're going to need it. Now these are just the ideas that I have. Let me know in the comments below if you have any of your own or if you think any of these sound stupid. Now bards are a support archetype which provides buffs for support, healing, DPS, movement, you name it. The cool thing about bards is that you are rewarded for how well you play the class, such as landing skill shots or how close you are to the target. This means that they won't just be a buff bot that's here to serve their DPS overlords and then be forgotten about. They have to be involved. The range of abilities looks like it will fall into either wordsmithing, acting, and musical aspects. Now we don't know what the different augment paths will be for the Argent, but we can speculate. They are a support class through and through that relies on performing well to enhance their buffs. I think this gives us either a musical route or an acting route. The musical route being related to the order that you use the abilities and how that matters. Depending on the order that you press the skills, it could provide different effects to the group. Maybe pressing a movement buff and then a taunt will force the mobs to quickly group up to your position. Or maybe using a DPS buff followed with a taunt will cause that target to take significantly increased damage. Now the acting route would be related to how much of a show you put on for your group. On screen is a quote from Steven about doing a performance and enhancing your party. So, this sounds like how you react and fight will matter with these buffs. Say I rush in, and I use an ability that allows me to taunt multiple enemies. Perhaps landing it on a certain number, say 5 enemies, will cause me to take less damage for a certain duration. Or perhaps if I land an AoE ability, such as Shockwave on a large enough group, it inspires my allies to increase their damage for a short time. Now, I find both of these interesting because it means that the bards have to truly perform well in order to take advantage of their abilities. If you aren't able to control the mobs well enough, or plan ahead of a fight, you will not be maximizing your party's efficiency. Now here we have generic RPG character number 13, the Knight. Fighters are meant to be experts in physical combat, masters of many weapons, and very mobile for you adrenaline junkies. They have told us that they want the fighter to focus on maneuverability, closing the gap, and being able to cut through enemy lines to get to the support area and burst down squishy enemies. Now what this tells me is that Knights will probably be on the more damage-focused spectrum of tanks. We know they want mobility, we know they want burst damage, so it stands to reason that those would be our augment paths when choosing a fighter. Now the mobility path seems pretty straightforward. It could give you multiple charges on your gap closer, or add more damage to your gap closer. The damage path is a bit trickier for balance reasons. I could see this path giving you more damage to taunted enemies, or maybe gap closing to an enemy marks them and increases your damage for a short time. It could give you a throw the gauntlet type augment, where you call an enemy out and you both take increasing amounts of damage and it just continues to ramp up over time. Either way, your normal dude with a sword tank always gets lots of love in video games, assuming that they aren't boring to play. So hopefully we won't have that issue. Imagination, destruction, power. The Mage is one of the most well-known classes in any RPG. The feeling of slinging destruction and creating your own light show of death is hard to pass up. In Ashes of Creation, we know that we will have 4 elements: air, fire, water, and lightning, with influences from darkness, light, and planar. The developers have stated that the augments will come from the 4 elemental schools. It's also worth noting that the elemental abilities are stronger in their corresponding seasons, such as ice abilities in the wintertime. I think this will be a bit more cut and dry than the other tanks. Whatever augment path is chosen will likely give you increased resistance to that element. I could see it providing you additional damage of your element. You can coat your weapon in fire or lightning. I would like to see more active augments though, such as when you use Onslaught to gap close to an enemy, you explode in your chosen element in an AoE around you. I find this and the next couple tanks very interesting because they aren't what you typically would think a tank should be. Death from afar is the ranger's reason for existing, and as you can imagine, being a master of the bow does not sound very tanky to me. If we didn't have a dedicated summoner class, I would assume that the warden would be given a bear or some other animal to help with the tank. With that being said, the developers have stated that the augments will increase the range of certain skills. Now try as I might, I can't see many instances where that would be a very useful combination. As the tank, you'll likely be engaged in melee with the enemies most of the time anyways. So maybe this could increase the number of enemies that your weapon throw hits, or maybe it could make your javelin hit multiple people. I suppose your AoE abilities such as Shockwave and Resounding Smash could get an increase in range, but even then it doesn't really seem worth the augment. I guess time will tell as the Alpha 2 releases. Now this tank I have a better idea of. Rogues are more about physical disabling, bleeds, stealth, and situational burst. Stealth is what they have listed as the intended augment when picking rogue as your secondary archetype, but that being said, it doesn't jive with a tank very well. I find it much more likely that they will give you disabling and bleed effects instead, giving us more CC for important enemies or some added damage via giving our combat abilities a bleed effect. There's no weapon requirement for tanks, so if you build a dodge tank and equip dual daggers, you could probably still output quite a bit of damage. Additionally, rogues will have certain utility skills to find hidden doors, traps, and treasures. Now we don't know if you'll be given these skills when choosing rogue as your secondary, but if so, this could be quite the reason to choose a Night Shield as your class. Now, Summoner may be one of the most interesting classes in the game. Key to this hype is that they've stated your combat summons will add to the Summoner's powers, not take a portion of them. I think you see this in a lot of other games, and sometimes they use the excuse of trying to make a mechanically easy class, but what ends up happening is that you take all of the player power, you put it in the summon, and then what's left is that your class is just boring to play. I like the direction the developers seem to be taking here. Now, they have stated that the Summoner's secondary will grant skills that summon weapons. For a tank, obviously this could mean summoning a shield that helps you block attacks and increase your defense. But I would like to see you be able to summon an actual pet. I want to summon a bear or a turtle that can tank right beside me. They've stated you'll have different summons for tanking, DPS, or support, but we aren't sure if that's in the context of choosing Summoner as your secondary, or if that's just if Summoner is your primary. I suppose we'll have to wait and find out. Now, last but not least, the Guardian. Now, seeing as how this is tank with some extra tank on the side, it should be an absolute wall. They haven't released any information on what choosing tank as your secondary can provide. I assume it'll be more defense. What we do know is that all classes with tanks as the primary archetype are capable of tanking high-end content, so we shouldn't run into any issues where the Guardian is the only option for tanking. What seems likely is that it'll double down on your defenses and up the ante on your abilities that help with aggro and crowd control. This added defense could provide you enough that you're able to make some trade-offs elsewhere in your build, such as your armor or weapon being more offensive focused. I also find it very likely that it gives you the option to spread your defensive capabilities out to the rest of your team and make your focus on mitigating damage for the entire group as much as possible. And that does it for my tank speculations. Let me know in the comments what you think I got right or wrong. Tell me what your ideas are. The August development update should include more information on the tanks, so we should know relatively soon how close we are. If you liked this video, leave a like, comment, subscribe. It really does help the channel out. Consider using my referral code to join the discussion on the Ashes of Creation forums, and I'll see you guys next time.